Okay, in this problem, we're going to start this section of the beginner lessons. We're going to talk about doing geometry backwards, which means you're given something that we're used to finding, and then you got to find something else. So in this first example, it says the perimeter of a square is 32. What is the area of the square? Well, to do well with this, you have to use a little bit of algebra, and you have to use know the formulas really well. So it says the perimeter of a square is 32. Well, you remember that perimeter of a square equals 4 times a side. So if your perimeter of the square is 32, you ask yourself, what times 4 equals 32? It's the same as looking at this equation. 4s equals 32. If you know how to solve it, you divide by 4, you get side equals 8, or you can just think 8 times 4 is 32. So if a side is 32, what's the area of the square going to be? Well, area of a square is side squared. So in this case, your area is 64. Okay, in this example, it says a rectangle has an integer side length and an area of 48. What are all the possible perimeters of the rectangle? Well, the formula for a area of a rectangle is length times width. We know that the length and the width have to be integers, so we need to go through and think of what are all the possibilities. Well, if we know length times width is 48, well, you got to go through and list all the possibilities. Well, one is 1 times 48, right? Another would be 2 times 24. And you got to keep going, and the best way to do this is to do it organized. Start with the smallest number possible. 3 times 16, 4 times 12, 6 times 8, and I believe that's all of them. You could go through and look, but I think that's all the possible areas. So now we got to find perimeters. Well, remember, perimeter is just 2 times length plus 2 times width, or vice versa. And so 1 would be 98, and you could just keep going on these and find out what all the possibilities are. And if you notice, as I'm just solving these quickly for you, these are getting smaller and smaller perimeters, and you'll find out as you do these problems that the smallest perimeter is always going to be the two numbers that are closest together, and in that case, this holds. So the 5 possible perimeters of this rectangle are found by finding all of the factor pairs of 48, and then going through and calculating perimeter using our perimeter formula, which is 2L plus 2W. So 98, 52, 38, 32, and 28 are our solutions. It says a circle has circumference 12 pi. What is the area of the circle? Well, again, know the formulas. Circumference equals diameter times pi, which means that our diameter very clearly is 12. If we know our diameter is 12, we should know that our radius is half of that, which is 6, because the radius is always half the diameter. The area of the circle then is just, well, pi r squared, so pi times 6 squared, which equals 36 pi. All right, and then our last example, a square and a rectangle that is not a square. Remember, a rectangle can be a square. Okay, square is contained inside the set of rectangles. But we're saying in this case, the rectangle we're talking about is not a square. Have equal perimeters with integer side length. The area of the rectangle is 144. What is the area of the square? Now this is an interesting problem. And we got to kind of break it down a little bit. First off, we got a couple interesting points here. First off, the perimeters are equal. Okay? Now, as we did in 2 problems ago, we know that if the area of the rectangle is 144, there are lots of different perimeters. However, if your square is going to have a perimeter equal to that, the perimeter of a square, if you remember, is 4s, which just means it's 4 times the side length. Since the side length is an integer, the perimeter of this square has to be a multiple of 4. So that means the perimeter of the rectangle also has to be a multiple of 4 because their perimeters are equal. So that makes it a lot easier. So now let's start looking for perimeters multiple of 4. Well, one perimeter would be 1 times 144, which if you notice would give you, well, that turns out to be 290. And if you try to divide by 4, you would find out that is not a multiple of 4. And if you notice, what's going to happen is the only way for this to be a multiple of 4 is if both these are multiples of 4. Okay? And so for both those to be multiples of 4, then you need both of these numbers to be integers. So it turns out the only way for this to happen is for both of them to be integers. And so one possibility would be 2 times 72. Both those are even integers, and since they're both even, then that means that when we multiply them by 2, that means now they're both multiples of 4. And so that gives me 4 plus 144, which is 148. Yeah, 148 is a multiple of 4. When you divide 148 by 4, you end up with 37. So the area of the square would be 37 squared, which turns out to be equal to 1369. So one answer to this problem would turn out to be 1369. It doesn't turn out to be the only one, right? If I'm using that I need even numbers, I could put 4 in, right? 4 goes into 144 36 times. So 2 times 4 plus 2 times 36 equals 80. Well, if the perimeter of the rectangle is 80, the perimeter of the square would be 80. 80 divided by 4 is 20. And so the area of the rectangle would be 400. Or area of the square would be 400. And you can imagine continuing to go along. 6 goes into 144. So it turned out that the area of the square is a lot of different possibilities. So there wasn't one answer, but the key was recognizing for this what had to be true for this to happen.